This is a horrific crime. It's one of the worst crimes that I've prosecuted in my 22 years of prosecution.
A grandmother, mother, and daughter all executed in their own home. The family dog also shot and killed before the alleged murderer goes on the run. But investigators are able to track him down thanks to the miraculous survival of another victim in the case, a second daughter who managed to escape the crime scene and run to a neighbor's house for help. 3
women are dead, and a surviving victim lost her mother, her grandmother, and her sister. My prayers are with the entire family, and I want you to know that we will utilize the full weight of Missouri law to bring this defendant to justice.
We're taking a closer look at the case with the help of retired homicide investigator Phil Waters. But before all that, let's go through what exactly happened. And for that, we'll head to Kansas City, Missouri. That's where the case begins and the murder takes place. On the north side of the city, those 3 generations of women all live together. There's the grandmother, 73-year-old Sherri Duncan, her daughter, the mother in this case, 49-year-old Jodie Duncan Hopcus, and then her daughter, 24-year-old Hailey Hopcus. Another daughter also lived in the home, but investigators haven't released her name, so we're not going to either. For a time, though, there was one other person who lived in this home too. That was 50-year-old Armando Navarro Jr., who had been in a relationship with Jodie. In the late night hours of February 1st into the early morning hours of February 2nd, Jodie and Armando were in an argument.
She said that prior to the shooting, her mother and Navarro were arguing. As she was going to bed, she heard her mother yelling. She went out of the room and heard her mother telling Navarro to leave. Navarro replied that he didn't want to leave. The surviving victim said that for about an hour, her mother and Navarro argued as her mother told him to leave, and he said he had nowhere to go.
During all this, Armando apparently walked back and forth from his room, so it seemed like he was packing up his belongings to actually leave, but that's not what happened.
Navarro then allegedly came out of his room armed with a small handgun and started shooting at them. The surviving victim's mother was shot in her upper arm. Navarro then ran out of bullets in his handgun.
As the surviving daughter was trying to help her mother, Navarro allegedly returned with another gun. He put the gun under his chin like he was going to shoot himself, but he didn't. A warning, this next part is extra heartbreaking.
Her mother tried to shield the surviving victim behind her own body. Her mother was trying to get over to the door. However, Navarro allegedly shot her in the face.
The surviving victim says she believes her grandmother, Sherri Duncan, had already been shot at this point because she was lying on the ground and wasn't moving. 24-year-old Hailey Hopcus then called out to her sister, the surviving daughter, telling her to get out of the house.
As the surviving victim was trying to do just that, Navarro allegedly shot her sister and also shot at the surviving victim. She said she felt a projectile hit her hair and saw some of her hair on the floor. In fact, she showed detectives where her hair was damaged.
At some point during all of this, Armando allegedly also shot the family dog. But the surviving daughter was miraculously able to escape. When she was outside, she allegedly heard Armando calling her name, but she ran off to a neighbor's house. The neighbors called 911 at 12:41 a.m. on February 2nd, about the same time that Armando allegedly took off in Jodie's SUV.
Officers then went to the scene of that shooting and found 3 female victims suffering from apparent gunshot wounds inside that residence. The women were confirmed deceased by members of the Kansas City Fire Department. The officers also found a deceased dog that had apparently been shot.
Meanwhile, Navarro was headed west, and he made it about 170 miles away too. That was until his SUV broke down in Abilene, Kansas. Law enforcement there were already in contact with him because of this, and they were told that a tow truck was on the way. But when Kansas Highway Patrol troopers got word that he was wanted in connection to this triple homicide, they arrested him. We also want to note that during this getaway drive before his arrest, Armando apparently called his son and confessed, saying he, quote, killed them all. The son then called 911 and reported this. Armando Navarro now faces multiple charges, including 3 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of armed criminal action, 1 count of first-degree assault, and another of animal cruelty. He's being held in Kansas right now without bond as he awaits extradition back to Missouri. All right, so those are the facts as we know them right now, but we're gonna dig a little bit deeper. We're gonna bring in our expert. That's retired homicide detective Phil Waters. Phil, thanks for coming on. And I wanted to ask right to start. What jumps out to me in this case is the fact that we have a grandmother, mother, and daughter. So 3 generations of women who are brutally murdered in their own home. What are your thoughts on that, just to start?
Well, good to see you again, Sierra. I will tell you that these incidents of familicide are always heart wrenching. They're always they destroy, obviously, in the most literal way, entire families. And this is no different than the ones that I have seen previously. And fortunately, there is a another daughter that was able to escape. So there was a potential there for wiping out, I guess, 4 generations actually. So when we see these types of things happen, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So the suspect in this case, which I never mention these people's names. I do not want to give them any kind of recognition for what they've done. So the suspect in this particular case, though, was the boyfriend of one of the women, and he was living there with them. And at some point in time, this relationship was done, and he was asked to leave. Well, he's not going anywhere. I don't have anywhere to go, and therefore I'm staying. And then I guess when the issue was pressed, that caused him to react in the manner in which he did, which again caused the deaths of these individuals, this entire family.
It's got to be so hard for the family, though, because if they're living in this house and he's there too, I'm sure they see him every day, go to sleep, wake up, they're safe in their home. They're going to assume that no one in the home is going to harm them. But then there's some sort of switch that flips, and all of a sudden he allegedly grabs his gun and shoots most of the women in the home. So what is that? I mean, how do you go from 0 to 100, living healthy, happy, safe, and all of a sudden just grabbing a gun?
Well, to address the last, what the qualities that you said last, we don't know that. We're right. We don't know that this was a healthy, happy home, secure
Fair
home.
enough.
Uh, it sounds like it had a lot of problems. And again, to use your term, to go to 0 to 100, it doesn't happen in that way. So, as I've already said, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. This is something that builds over time. I am sure that there was some dispute going on, and obviously they were wanting him to leave. He did not want to leave. He had nowhere else to go, so he's at the end of his rope in a lot of different ways, it sounds like. And so we don't know what the dynamics of the relationship was, but he's got all these family members of the person that he has the relationship with living in the same home, and he's there with them. Now, I can imagine, so you've got 4 women in this home, if we count the daughter that was able to escape. And just speaking for myself, that's a lot of pressure on a man. I just, because he's got, you got the grandmother and the mother and the daughter and the other relative. So that's not a recipe for that for a really happy uh, family home life. I don't think. And so we don't know what the different personality types and so forth and so on. So obviously something happened here that we may find out. I don't know what extent they've got him in custody. If he was interviewed, I'm assuming that there was an attempt to interview him, at least to find out. I mean, if I were interviewing him, of course, you want to find out what did cause this. What did cause you to go from 0 to 100 in an instant like that? Because this is an event that you can't you can't unring this bell. I mean, once it's done, it's done. And he even kills the dog. So a lot of anger, a lot of hate going on here. And so I'm hopeful that the detectives were able to at least decipher from him what what triggered this, what snapped.
You're right to point out that we don't know for sure if this is a healthy, happy family, just that we hadn't gotten any prior calls, at least that I've seen reported, of domestic violence or incidents in the home. But we could learn more about what led up to the shooting, and I think this is vital to the case. We've talked about her, the surviving daughter who was able to escape, run to a neighbor's, call 911. She is huge for this case. I'm sure investigators would talk to her right away to get as much details as they could. But of course, she witnessed something very traumatic. So, how would they walk that fine line of getting all the info but not re traumatizing her?
Well, that's going to be you're right. That's going to be a fine line. They're going to have to, uh, her interview, which is going to be very revealing about the dynamics in the home. And let me say something here too. When I'm talking about the four women living in the house and the man living in the house, I'm not trying to victim shame here or victim blame. So before anybody gets off into that, I just want to clarify that I'm simply trying to analyze what the possible atmosphere was in the home. So I'm hopeful that the young lady that was able to escape, now she's going to be able to put those pieces together. What was it like living in the home? What was going on? What was the relationship between the suspect in this case and the women individually? Because I am sure that he's got a different type of relationship with each one of those women. One of them obviously is a more intimate relationship because that's a girlfriend boyfriend type situation. But she's going to be a treasure trove of information into what led up to this horrific event.
And I'm sure they talked to her right away after. I mean, in one of the press conferences, the prosecutor says the surviving daughter said XYZ. So we know that they have chatted, at least initially. But do you think there are going to be more discussions moving forward as we move a bit farther away from the event, that she can kind of settle, collect herself a bit more, and maybe they could learn more about what happened?
Well, it's been my experience that that initial interview right there is the most reaps the most benefit. Uh, that is when the circumstances of what happened is in its most stark contrast. So the things that she will remember. Now, of course, I always end an interview like this with, if later on you've had time to think, you've had time to process this, if there is something that you remember, something that comes to you that we did not discuss here, then please contact me and let's discuss that. So you always want to leave that door open, but they're going to get, at least again, in my experience, they're going to get their best uh, information and that initial interview, and because it will be so ingrained in her mind. So I'm hopeful that that's what occurred. Now the other thing, the opposite could have occurred. She could be so traumatized that she's not able to recall at that moment in time. But I don't. That's not my sense about this young lady. She sounds to me. I mean, she looked out. She saw the suspect leaving in her mom's truck. So there's a lot of details that she provided that I think she was able to share without being uh, kind of internal about everything. I think she was ready and willing to share everything that she knew, everything that she saw, everything that she witnessed.
I think you're right, because a lot of what we know about this case does come from her, at least through the authorities who kind of cite her as describing what happened. And you mentioned something too, that the suspect drove off in her mom's vehicle, fled the area, goes from Missouri to Kansas. To me, very clear, very simple. It looks like he's running away. I don't know where he was headed exactly. His vehicle breaks down and eventually he's arrested in Kansas. But what do you make of that? Is that normal, quote unquote, for someone to commit this murder and then go on the run, flee the crime scene?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that I would call it normal. I think it would be a response, of course. I've had scenes where the suspect goes in, commits the murders, and the first instinct is to flee. And what's typical about this, though, is they don't flee very far. They're pretty attached to the area in which the crime occurred. And in most cases, they don't really have anywhere to go. Now, he may, who knows? Again, I would hope that he was, they allowed, he was allowed authorities, detectives to interview him, and that he would share that. Where were you headed? You knew, because obviously he knew what he had done was horrific. He knew that. So the instinct there is to flee and get it behind him. And so I would be curious to know where he was headed, if he knew where he was headed, if he just got in the truck and just hit the road and just started rubber balling. He was just going to keep driving until he couldn't drive any longer or decided to stop or whatever that may have been. So we won't know that unless they were able to speak with him, interview him, and get that directly from him.
I'm wondering about that interview too, because the crime happened in Missouri and then he's arrested in Kansas, where he's being held right now with plans to be extradited back to Missouri. But since he's in Kansas, who would talk to him? Would it be investigators there, or would the Missouri ones come to the jail? Let's say he does want to talk. What would that look like logistically?
Well, if it's my case, I want the first crack at it. I'm the one that knows the details. I'm the one that's invested in that investigation to try to share those things with other detectives in another jurisdiction uh, where they're going to be as vested in that investigation as I am is a tough road to hoe. So if it's me, and I would assume that that's what's going to happen here, the detectives at the scene where this occurred, they want the first bite at that apple. So it doesn't take it doesn't it's no big deal for detectives to travel from point A to point B to talk to their suspect. So I would imagine that's what's going to happen in this case. And I know if it was my case, that's what I would want to do.
And obviously, it's not that far away. I think it's about 170 miles. So it does check out that it would be a relatively easy drive for the initial investigators in Missouri to head over there. Again, I haven't heard anything whether he's consented to an interview, whether he's talked more or not. I guess that hasn't quite yet been reported, but let's just say, for instance, that he does speak with investigators. Let's say he speaks with you. What are the things you're asking right away?
Well, the first thing I'm going to try to do is establish a relationship with him. I'm not just going to walk in there as the cop, the detective, you know, I'm so and so from, whatever department, homicide division, and blah blah blah, and you're in here, and we're that kind of a thing. Which a lot of detectives take that approach. My approach to him is going to be establish that relationship, and I want to know first. I want to know about his relationship with the mother, with the woman in that house that they had the boyfriend girlfriend intimate relationship. That's the first thing I want to know about because that's where this all culminates from. That's why he's there because he has this relationship with her. That's why he's living there. So that's what I want to know. Then I want to know what is his relationship with the other women in that house. What are the dynamics between them? What kind of positive interaction do you have with them? What kind of negative interaction do you have with them? I want to find out from him, and I call these psychological autopsies about what led him to make this decision to do this, to commit this horrific act. And so that would be my approach with him. And then, at least in my experience, in most cases, that gets me to where I need to be. And it's not about walking in there and trying to figure out what kind of a charge. It's about walking in there and a journey to the truth. And once you make that appeal, at least in my experience, to most people, they want to tell you what happened. They want to explain it. Now, He may give a bunch of self-serving statements, but the point is that my approach to him uh, is going to be patient. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to listen to him, not hear him. I'm going to listen to him, and then I'm going to be empathetic. And again, in my experience, that's just the way I teach interviewing. Those are the three qualities you've got to take into that room. And it would be interesting to find out cases like this, of course, and every homicide I investigated. That was always my desire, was to find out the why, because that's always the question that's asked, and sometimes it's never answered. But yeah, the why in this case would pique my interest.
And I think that's what everyone wants to know. Why? I love the phrase that you used, the journey to the truth, because that's what we all want to know. We still have a lot of questions in the case. So we'll continue to follow it and see where it goes. But for now, Phil Waters, thank you for coming on and breaking down what we know so far.
Thank you, Sierra, for having me. Take care.
Prosecutors in Missouri say they're considering the death penalty in this case, but won't make that decision right away. They plan to talk it over with the victim's family before making any announcements. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.